Welcome to the Flexible Philosophy Podcast, where we explore psychology, religion, and philosophy in everyday life. We are both therapists, but we're not your therapist. This show is just for conversation, learning, and fun. It's not professional advice or therapy. If you need support for your own situation, please reach out to a professional therapist. We are so glad you're here. Let's kick it off.
Welcome to our next episode. So nice to have all two of you here.
Yep, it's a delightful gathering again. We have some Leo
Where
content.
two or more are gathered. Here we
Are
are.
you trying to trigger the
So,
audience with a Bible verse right off the bat? Right off the bat?
yep. I love exposing people to what makes them anxious. So, okay. Well, we had a request from our listener to talk about the moment that faith breaks, or the moment that you realized what you believed at one point wasn't real anymore.
Yeah.
I personally don't have a testimony about that. The triggering continues. I don't have a testimony about that moment specifically. But I know Jennifer does, and we're wanting to just like dissect that a little bit today, like how it happens as a psychological phenomenon. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
But you were going to go
What was
first and be an example of that's not how it happens for everyone.
Okay. Well, yeah, so I don't have a testimony about like faith stuff straight up not resonating
Yeah.
anymore. But something that did happen, okay, I have these conversations that go on the inside, okay? Jennifer, can you explain internal family systems just like in a little nutshell for the people that don't know what that is?
In a nutshell, internal family
Okay.
systems is one way of conceptualizing our internal world and how we relate to ourselves. So it doesn't have like the ultimate, like it hasn't invented it. It has only discovered a way to talk about it. So it's just, how does your internal critic talk to you? How does your internal like jokester talk to you? Like all of us have, most of us have an audible like internal dialogue that's thinking out loud. And sometimes that shifts personalities depending on where we are. And so it just slows that dialogue down and starts to focus your curiosity towards it so that you can reflect on the different parts of you and how they're operating inside of you. Because most people are kind of on autopilot with those voices and their internal dialogue.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So I think of it as like your work self is interacting with someone in a certain way, but then you go home and then like your partner self kind of like comes out, or like if you're interacting with your kids, you're not going to have the same interaction or personality or like way of
Yeah.
speaking as you do at work. So it doesn't mean that you're experiencing some sort of psychotic break or severance,
Yeah.
but
Innie and outie.
um yeah, yeah. It's not that you're experiencing some sort of like difference like that. It's just like the way that you operate. And so on the inside, those different voices kind of chime in at different times, you know? So like if my daughter comes up to me and is telling me about like some comment that a kid made at school about mental health, I'm like being the mom with her, but on the inside, the therapist self is like diagnosing maybe, or sometimes hard to turn that off. But anyways, okay. So that's how these parts coexist, right? So sometimes in the car, I will listen to like throwback worship music, okay? For just like the straight nostalgia of it, okay?
Sessions, I do that
And
too.
okay. Okay. Do you listen to, is it K-Love or like is
Oh,
it
I
Spotify?
cannot with Caleb. No, I go to like 90s, like
Yeah.
Cadence Call and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah. It's something that happens, I think, for a lot of people have deconstructed. It's like there's some components that you
Yeah,
miss. It's just
it
nostalgic.
is
So,
nostalgic.
anyways, if I go on Spotify and I type in like worship music, okay? Nowadays, if I hit play on that, I don't know any of those songs. I I don't know them. I mean, the evangelical world has moved on without me.
Yep.
You know, if you don't go to church for a year, you don't know the songs that they're singing, you know? And so I'll go in and be like 2010s worship and I'll listen to like older stuff, you know? And so, anyways, when I was in the car, I was thinking about that. I was like, dang, like I really feel if I were to go to church, like I wouldn't feel like I belonged. Like I don't know these songs. I'm just as a person that's like never gone, you know? And so uh that that brought me to like the topic that we decided to talk about. I was like, I don't really have a testimony of like my faith breaking. It's more like being disillusioned with like the people or disillusioned with like this idea that like leadership can control my decision making in my day-to-day life and stuff like that.
Okay.
So that's what I found freedom from, like not being involved in any of that anymore.
Oh.
So, yeah, I had this like internal dialogue happening of like, I feel so much freedom. I don't want to be connected anymore. Like, I don't care if I don't know the songs anymore. Like, I've been good outside of this whole community. And then there's this fundamentalist part of me, this like very religious part of me that I always know what the arguments are going to be. So that part was like, well, you had control of that. You shouldn't have left then. You know, had you stayed, you would still feel like you belonged. So, like, you did that to yourself. Right. And so then I'm like, well, I had reason to do that because, like, remember everything that happened. And then that part comes back with like all these Bible verses of like, you know, don't look at what's happening in front of you, but fix your eyes on what's eternal and stuff like that. And I'm just like, I am, you know, it's like, yeah, so there's this like conversation that's going on, and I know you've talked before about like how these parts become polarized, you
Mhm.
know, and I always describe it as a tug of
Yeah.
war that's going on the inside. Yeah, it's like it's a debate on a consistent basis between the, like, freedom that I found, like,
Yeah.
actually, and the freedom that the religious part holds on to, because, like, to it, freedom comes with, confession, and freedom comes with, like, being involved in a community and stuff like that. It's like freedom from eternal
Yeah.
damnation, whereas this other half of me is like, I don't believe in that as a concept anymore. Maybe there's been moments where, like, those scary doctrines have, like, ceased to make sense to me, you know,
Mhm.
but in the larger context, I still, um, philosophize about, like, a lot of religious concepts, but anyways, any thoughts coming from you that, like, you know, you're familiar with how these dialogues and polarizations work and
Okay,
things?
wait, let me, like a therapist, get it straight, even though we just talked about how we're
Okay.
not therapists on this podcast, but this is your
Yeah.
content. Um,
Okay.
so are you saying that one part of you thinks it's best for you to not be in the religious spaces because you're free from the authority and the way that it was harming you, but the other voice that you call the fundamentalist voice is, pretty sure that you've made a bad decision and that you should go back and is giving you Bible verses to be like, what would be best for Aleesa as if she was back in those spaces? Because that's really good for her. Is that the
Yeah,
answer?
like, that yes, that's 100% correct. I would also add that that religious part feels very authoritarian.
Ah,
Yeah. Like it's like this was the instruction and you didn't follow that, so you can make restitutions, you know? And like you can just go back to how things were before all of this happened. You could go back, you could just learn the songs and fit in again and just like continue on with that and feel the security of eternity. So,
yeah.
you know, but if you're resistant to that, that's your own fault.
What do you feel towards both of those parts that you have as you're telling it to me?
Um My gut answer to that is I'm like, why can't this religious one just like calm down?
Yeah,
And I know the answer to that because the fear that goes into a lot of these teachings and stuff makes it be on edge, you know, and it kind of like makes it flip through all these rule books and stuff like that. Like you have to make sure that you're doing it right and you have to make sure all your boxes are checked and stuff like
yeah,
that. So yeah, when one part's just like, oh, I don't know these songs anymore, the other one's like, yeah, you think I'm aware. It's been years
yeah,
since we felt like we were in a good space,
yeah.
like salvation-wise, you know? But on the other hand, I'm like, I can't submit back to that authority. And then this one's like, you know, submit and get back in there. do all the things. You don't want to submit because you're stiff-necked like the Israelites in
Yeah, they're
Exodus.
so bad and they're so
Yeah.
prideful. Okay, I feel like a ton of compassion for the fundamentalist one because since you're currently not doing what it wants, that's the one holding all the distress because it's like over there knowing all the verses and knowing what the quote right thing to do is and like holding all the scary stuff for you. While happy you is just like, oh, it's fine. We're out of church. And this one is sitting there. It feels like in a corner, like, oh my gosh, this is so serious. And then it's coming back louder in your head because it's like,
Yes.
I got to make sure she knows how serious this is. And I'm so scared.
Yeah.
Am I like, am I exaggerating it?
Yeah. That's the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do those coexist together?
That's hard.
That's the question. Yeah.
It's hard. My zoomed out lens is that, like, I have this sense that a lot of people who are raised in religion, especially like really fear-driven ones where there's so many rules, if they leave, probably most of us have like a version of that part in our head that chimes in and tells us like, "Hey, this is a terrible decision. You've broken
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
religious rules."
Mhm. Yep. So, I think, like, functionally, they coexist just by, like, having the tug of war happen
Yeah.
and just being like, "Yeah, I hear you, but, like, this is the decision I'm making," you know? Or it's
Mhm.
like when you're dealing with I don't know if our listeners will understand, but, like, when you're dealing with, like, younger parts, that are, like, fearful and stuff like that, it's just kinda like, "Hey, I'm your adult now," Like, let the 34-year-old make the decisions, not the scared 7-year-old, you
Yeah.
know? And yeah, so it's just kind of like, hey, uh, bring the 7-year-old over. It's just like, watch how I handle this. Watch how I address it as a stable adult, and
Totally.
we can move forward. Yeah, that's it. That's such a nutshell that takes like months of therapy, I think, to practice and be like, get back behind me. You don't need to be making these decisions, but I want to watch. I want you to watch how that ends up happening, or how things can be scary, but they end up being addressed by an adult, and then it goes by smoothly.
I think that's
But
the trick that you do in therapy sometimes is that, like you just said, you don't like that voice that brings all the verses up because it's mean, but if you can have
yeah.
an internal paradigm shift and think of it like that voice is coming from a part that's more childlike and needs your comfort,
Mhm.
instead of abandoning it and
Yeah.
shoving it away, then you turn towards it and you're like, "You're right, that is so scary that someone told you one
Mhm.
time you were gonna be in big trouble for moving," and then you, like, feel that adult self in your body and sort of, like, show the part like I'm big now and I'm safe and like look at all like I'm okay. But also like it's hard because I think most of us want to shove that part away and not listen to it because it's so upset and yet listening to it sometimes is like the way to make it better.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
I'm
Yeah.
always good to hear
The
about your fundamentalist part that's scared.
The intervention that happened with that, if you notice a few minutes ago, I said that that part is authoritarian and it's saying all these things. I was seeing it as like this older man, with a rule book. But if you unzip that, like Scooby Doo style, if you unzip that character, sometimes there is someone else that's inside of that. And like, I think psychologically, I was kind of like doing that on my own. It's like that was actually a kid that was like using this microphone to voice its own fears, but in the form of a authoritarian figure that I'd be more likely to listen to than the child.
Oh,
Yeah. So sometimes, like, that's a straight up therapy intervention of like, if you really look at that character, you unzip them, what else might be lying underneath that? And yeah, it forges more self-compassion for sure. Or, there's this big concept in internal family systems of there being no bad parts. So To say, "I want that part to shut up. I wish it weren't a thing. I wish it didn't exist." That's not really the best approach to it. It's more of like understanding who they are and then relating to them in a developmentally appropriate way. Like, "Hey, stand here and watch. Like, I'm the adult now,
Yeah.
but I want you to see this." That's better than like, "You can't tell me what to do," because like they're 7.
And that
So,
yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, it's such a
So,
paradigm shift because then if you see them shift from a scary adult man older than you into a little kid, then, like, you can bring comfort to that part as yourself, like, you're capable of, like if it was a seven-year-old, you wouldn't be scared of what they had to say, and you would see that, like, okay, they've been told something they don't understand fully, and, like, they just need a hug, basically. They just need you to hug them.
yeah. Big psychological
Ah,
breakthroughs.
that's so
So,
fun.
yep, that's that. That's the commute thoughts. That's what I
Thanks.
think about driving in the car.
Just you and yourselves.
It's heavy. Yep.
Thank you for
Deep.
sharing, that's cool.
Yeah. So, what was your turning point moment and what did it feel like?
So, I was just telling Lisa before we started, I love listening to Mormon Stories podcast. It is my favorite because their whole content is these long form, 3 hour long interviews of a Mormon, and all the people they interview have left. Like they're not there to interview people who are really still person sometimes, but not really. And so you hear the story of like how they decided they were not going to be Mormon and why. And I don't think anyone in the evangelical or Christian space is doing it quite the same, and I like their form. So, I was just listening to them talk about it, and when they have some vocabulary that I think is really helpful. So they talk a lot about your shelf breaking. So like in Mormonism, they would describe that like you have cognitive dissonance, like you learn about polygamy or you learn about how the Book of Mormon was written, and it's like you put it on the shelf, meaning like okay, that's new information, but I don't really wanna I can't deal with that, so I'm gonna, like, prop it up on the shelf in my mind and not go back there, and then they say that there's a moment where their shelf breaks, and so it's like too
Okay.
many things line up at once and their belief or their commitment is, like, dramatically changed. So, my version of this was, um, when I was a really, really the most dedicated in my faith was probably high school, college, and probably had some subtle questions that I put on the shelf. First one was honestly, it always goes back to Mormonism for me. I had some Mormon friends in high school, and we were like trying to evangelize people. And I was like, I don't understand why it's fair for God to give my Mormon friends like access to their false religion, and I'm in the real, true religion. Like, that doesn't make it's not fair that God would judge them separately. But like, I've been like walked into the true faith and like, that I didn't choose that, and I really wrestled with the fairness of that, not to mention, like, the rest of the world that's not an evangelical Christian, right? Like, um,
Mhm.
but I kinda put it on my shelf, but I did, like, write in my journal about that, like, that bothers me, so that went on the shelf, and then I had questions about, like, the truth of Christianity, but, like, read A Case for Christ, and I was like, "Great, all my questions are answered, so not need to be on the shelf." When I was in college, I took a class called the New Testament, something the New Testament, but it was secular because I went to a public university. And we studied the New Testament and we studied the comparison of all four Gospels. And I had never been taught to read the Bible like that because you compare what all the different authors wrote chronologically. So like they line up, there's like a book that lines up all these different passages. Yep. Q source. And I learned about this thing called the Q source. So this professor starts telling me like, we think academically that am I going to say it right? Matthew and Luke copied off of Mark, and Luke and John copied off of a source we don't even have. So I can't get it exactly right, but it was starting to filter into my brain that the books that I was studying as God's love letter to me that were exactly perfectly preserved were not some sort of eyewitness account where like there was a news report of what Jesus did and said. It was like 50 years later, someone's copying off a manuscript we don't even have. And like that really affected me, but I put it on the shelf and literally forgot about it. I didn't pursue it. I didn't ask other questions. I was just like, oh, that's upsetting. And then that went on the shelf. Um, and then, okay, two more. I'm going to try to do this fast.
Well, I think that's interesting because, like, for some people, that would create cognitive dissonance and they put it on the shelf. But in other circles, it gets rationalized by being like, well, that's the beauty of it, you know? And we don't even know the origin. It kind of like makes it more mystical, yet it was preserved, or like this is relevant to us because it's humans' accounts, and like they preserved it. I don't know. I think there's some sort of like mystical things that make it even like more credible or give it some street cred of like, oh, like that's the mystery of the scrolls and blah blah blah. But
Well, yeah, and, like, to
anyways,
believe that, like, it's okay that this was written 50 years later and it was a copy of a copy of
yeah.
a copy, it's just, like, that's how God chose to reveal it. So you could always go back to,
Yeah.
like, "But that was God's plan." But then, like, my
Mhm.
cognitive mind is like, "Well, that doesn't seem like a very good plan." If God in his wisdom is going to have one way to communicate in these 4 special books, the life of Jesus
Yeah.
and the plan of salvation, it doesn't really seem like a great plan to do it and have it written down 50 years later and be copied off of things and changed. Like, seems like you'd be more
Well,
direct.
it's been Plan B since the fall, and then since Noah's Ark, and then since the oh my gosh, it's always there's a lot of curveballs and Plan Bs. So it's like, oh, it does track, It's not the best plan, but like because humans are involved, it hasn't been the plan all along. It was never the plan for Jesus to have to die. Like that was because sin entered the world.
You can always, if your mind isn't ready to think about it in another way of skepticism, it's like your spiritual mind, I think, can always rationalize and downplay the concerns. That's what the shelf
Sure.
is for.
That's that kid that's, like, on the inside in my little world, of, like, "Oh, it feels scary to entertain all of that because like, we have to keep it all organized over here, or the results are what do I wanna say?
They're sc they're
Fatal."
gonna harm you if you listen to those people,
Yeah.
and, like, I was really, really told before I went to college, like, "Don't take any classes from the secular university because it's gonna ruin your faith, and then you'll be" like, and so when I got information like that because someone had pre-indoctrinated me not to trust outside resources, which is very culty, um, I think I also discounted it because I was like, "Oh, this is what they were talking about. I shouldn't listen to this."
That's the Eye on the Bite model, FYI, by Steve Hassan.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the
Yeah.
I, information. Like, yeah, they police your information or they tell you if you do get access to it, don't believe it.
Do you know what else happened in that class? Okay, this is like one of my most favorite professors. He was this old man and he talked with his hands really big and he would just like go on these tangents. And he was a minister, but probably like a liberal minister, I don't know. And he also told us that he had worked in the Billy Graham Crusades, and he had been one of like at Billy Graham Crusades, like people come streaming down to the front to like do conversions. And so you have this staff of people, of volunteers that are trained to like pray with them and help them convert. And he told us that like in the training, like they were told to do some like shady stuff to like manipulate people into coming down and like in like he had such a critical like way of describing and before that I was like Billy Graham crusade like what a like perfect Christian and like these crusades are all so important and it was the first time I think an adult had been like this is like high manipulation and my mind was kind of like what? What?
Okay. Yeah. Like, taking advantage of the mob mentality type of thing,
Yeah.
or oh, there's someone here who just got in a fight with their husband right before this, and that type of thing.
Yeah, or it was something about, like, they were having to record extra numbers of conversions, like, manipulating the numbers, or it was something about, like, this isn't really real. It's not the behind the curtain of this Billy Graham crusade is not as pure and whole spiritual as you would want. It's kind of a little bit like, "Hey, let's make this look the best," and it's not really like what
Yeah.
they're saying to the trainees.
Okay.
So, that was kind of a big thing that got put on the shelf, and then, when I was in, like a young mom, I made friends with a Mormon once again, and she started trying to convert me. And I watched her do that, and I knew the research on Mormonism. Like, I knew a lot of the really complicated, like, discrediting things about the Book of Mormon. And she was really intelligent and didn't seem to be able to catch. And I was like, yikes, like, I wouldn't believe this to be true if I was you. And I could see her like justify it. And my mind kind of started glitching because I was like, "Oh, like she's doing the same thing you are." Like she believes some like outlandish things about heaven, but I was studying Revelation when we were friends and like we were believing some really out there stuff. We were going through, you know how it is, like the plagues and the seals and all the end times and like this is literally what's going to happen. And I was like, that's no different than her outlandish Mormon stuff. So my mind was like, "Oh, we're the same." And then I did something I just heard the guy in Mormon Stories say he did, which was Google the number of people that God will save based on your explanation for salvation. So I looked up based on like an evangelical plan of salvation. You're not talking Christians in the whole world, but like a dedicated personal relationship with Christ. How many people in the whole world could say that they have that? And Aleesa says it's 144,000. Is that true?
Anyway,
It was not a big number, and I was like, "Okay, so that means that, like, hundreds of thousands of millions of people are gonna go to hell," because I've done the math and how many people are, like, born again Christians in the world, and then you think about throughout time, and you think, like, how many billions of people God has designed to go to hell, and I was like, "Don't like that. Don't like how that feels."
yeah, Calvinism.
Yeah. Did not like that. And then I read,
Mhm.
okay, I'm almost the end of my story. I read, Rob Bell's, Love Wins, and I, like, read it in the dark at night on the Kindle. It was, like, the very beginning of Kindles, and before that, I wouldn't read that book because I thought it was, like, a bad influence, but at that point, I was ready to read it, and I was also
Farewell, Rob Bell.
there it is, the end of faith. And he was so progressive and he said so many things about like love and the idea that like God wouldn't do that. And I was like, yeah, exactly. Like it just made sense to me morally that like a loving God wouldn't behave the way that I'd been taught. And then I really was struggling with the policies of LGBTQ and like starting to unpack like what do we do with that if we're going to say that this is God's one way but people can't change how they're made and like I couldn't reconcile that. And then the final straw was this is actually not that uncommon, I found. I started reading Bart Ehrman's books about the New Test about how the Bible came to be. And I downloaded, or no, this was before you could download. I mail ordered a DVD of a debate between Bart Ehrman and another biblical scholar. And the title was Can We Trust the Text of the New Testament? And these two men went and presented evidence for like yeah, we can trust it. We know what it says. And Bart Ehrman was like, we don't have any original manuscripts. Most of the manuscripts are like from hundreds of years later, and we have copies of copies of copies, and we know that there's changes that the scribes made.
Yeah.
And it just, after the debate, I was like, I kind of agree with him. Like, I was like, I
Mhm.
think this makes the most sense. And again, for anyone else, I'm sure they could rationalize that, like, it doesn't matter. Like, God saw it through to God would have known to, like, give us the right copy. But in my mind, I was like, I don't think that this book is inspired at all. I think it was people that wrote it. I think it was people that came up with it. And so I'm standing in my kitchen probably a week or two after I watched that document or that video, and I just okay, we were just talking about parts, right?
Yeah.
A part inside of me, a voice said, "I don't think I believe this anymore." And none of the other parts were in agreement about it. It was like it was not an intentional thought. It just I heard it in my head. I don't believe that this is true anymore. I think this is a man-made religion, just like all the man-made religions, all over the world throughout time. And then I like the world stopped spinning for a minute and like I just can remember that moment so distinctly. And then I like walked out on my back patio and it was like really bright outside because like Texas sun. And my next thought was, what was the point of all of the praise and worship if I wasn't even singing to anyone? And I just your eyes just got so big. And I was like, I don't know what to do with that. And I just sat down on the patio for a second and like I also kind of put that moment on the shelf for a little while. I can't keep going because I feel like my story's forever, but that moment happened, and then I think another part in me sort of like was like trying to pretend it didn't. But once it was there, I had to like deal with it. But it took like 10 years to unpack that moment. There you
Wow.
go.
It's like it got put on a next level shelf.
Yeah, the shelf broke inside when I had that
Yeah.
thought, and then someone shut the closet door. They
Oh,
were like, "No, put
okay.
that shelf the shelf we can't fix the shelf, but we can shut the door."
Yeah. How
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
So,
Thanks for sharing that.
yeah.
We are unfortunately out of
Yep.
time. So we'll have to like put a pin on that like big suspenseful sensation. We'll just have to push that to next
Okay.
episode.
Well, peace out.
Sorry. Yeah. Mama's gotta
That's
work.
right. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye.